afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Ravitz, and I'm a member of Google's Real Estate and Workplace Services team. We're always working to create a healthier and more sustainable work environment for all of us here at Google. And I'm honored to have the privilege to introduce our guest today, Ray Anderson. The first time I heard Ray speak was about 4 years ago, the first time that I attended Greenbuild, the U.S. Green Buildings Council's very, very popular annual conference in Atlanta, Ray's home state. And Ray was a keynote speaker along with the equally inspiring Paul Hawken. But this journey began about 11 years before that, in 1994, when Ray read Hawken's book, The Ecology of Commerce, and experienced what he has called a spear in the chest epiphany. It was then that he set himself and Interface, the carpet manufacturing company that he had founded over 20 years earlier, on a completely new path to become the first industrial corporation to seek sustainability. Today, Interface calls that Mission Zero, to eliminate any negative impact on the environment by 2020. These efforts have not only transformed Interface, but have revolutionized an entire industry, a really large industry. Carpet and rugs cover an estimated 70% of floors in the US, and approximately 5 billion pounds of carpet are discarded every year. Just in Google's LEED Gold San Francisco office, where we reused as much of the existing carpeting as possible, we still discarded and recycled over 68,000 pounds, or about 7 garbage trucks full of carpet. It's a lot of carpet. Ray's transformational work reaches far past the carpet industry. He published his first book, Mid-Course Correction, in 1999. He has been featured in a slew of documentaries, including The Corporation and Leonardo DiCaprio's The 11th Hour. He served as co-chairman of the President's Council on Sustainable Development under Clinton, and more recently as an architect of the Presidential Climate Action Plan, a 100-day action plan on climate that was presented to the Obama administration. Ray has received more honors and awards for his work than I can possibly begin to list. Most recently, he has published his second book, Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ray Anderson.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and for the very generous introduction. Hello, everybody. I bring greetings from Atlanta. Funny way of talking, but bear with me. Your ears will get into eventually. Anthony, if I were introducing myself, I would be saying simply that I'm a husband, father of 2 daughters, grandfather of 5 terrific grandchildren, soon to be a great-grandfather, and I am an industrialist. Some would say a radical industrialist, but I promise you, each and every one, I am as competitive as anybody you know, as profit-minded as anybody you know, or as likely to meet. I founded my company Interface from absolute scratch, from just an idea 36 years ago, 1973, to produce carpet tiles in America for the emerging office of the future. Today, the office of the future is here, and carpet tiles are used around the world in the most modern offices and hospitals and schools and retail stores for their own use, and hotels, and you name it. Interface makes about 1/3 of all the carpet tiles used on Earth, which is a reasonable market share. That handle, Radical Industrialist, did become incorporated into the title of this book that I've just published with St. Martin's Press. And I want to take a couple of themes from the book today and develop them for these remarks. The title I would give these remarks, however, is not Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. I would give the title The Corporation of the Future, Reinventing the Industrial System. So that is very much what the book is about. So let me begin with 2 well-known quotes from 47 years ago. Quote, "We stand now where 2 roads diverge, but unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, they are not equally fair. The road we've long been traveling is deceptively easy, but at its end lies disaster. The other fork of the road, the one less traveled by, offers our last, our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of the earth. End quote. Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, 1962. 25 years later, quote, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present generation without sacrificing future generations' ability to meet their needs, end quote. The Brundtland Commission of the United Nations, 1987, 22 years ago. This afternoon I want to expand the meaning of those two quotes, and I want to rely on the adage that form follows function, and I'm going to be ignoring the form of the corporation of the future to concentrate on its function. So there won't be anything here about legal or organizational structure or governance issues. There's no attempt to address the controversial issue of personhood of a corporation, the mischief that might have caused through the years. I do make one assumption, and that is that capitalism will continue to set the framework within which the corporation of the future will function. So I suggest that capitalism itself will have to adapt. I'll concentrate these comments, as I do in the book, on corporations that make things, what they do and how they go about doing it. Furthermore, my focus is on the real economy, not its rough analog, the financial markets with their various indexes. In other words, my focus is on the industrial system, of which we are each and every one a part, either as producers or users or consumers. But it is this industrial system, this is where the greatest challenges to environmental sustainability lie. Contemplating the corporation of the future, one immediately is prompted to ask, well, what future? Not to suggest that there won't be a future, but to suggest that the future stretches far into, well, the future. So the question is, an important question really is, what time horizon are we addressing when we say the future? Whether in the title of these remarks, the corporation of the future, or in the Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainable development. Indeed, what time horizon was the Brundtland Commission contemplating when it posted its definition of sustainable development? Well, let me frame the macro issue of our times, as I see it, this way. We, individually and collectively, that is humankind, are an integral part of two interrelated, intimately coexisting global systems. Let us call one of these the technosphere. The other key component of the technosphere, besides ourselves, is the industrial system. It's the way we access raw materials and then make, transport, use, and discard things. Employing technologies across the full spectrum of technology: electrical, mechanical, construction, mining, metallurgical, textile, nuclear, agricultural, ceramic, automotive, biotechnological, as well as electronic and semiconductor technologies, and any others that you can think of. The technosphere, we and the industrial system coexist with a second global system, the biosphere. The biosphere consists of all the natural systems, the living systems, and the life support systems of the earth. The forests, the rivers, the oceans, the wetlands, the atmosphere, the ozone layer, the aquifers, the croplands, the grasslands, the hydrologic cycle, the carbon cycle, including photosynthesis, climate regulation, pollination, seed dispersal, flood and insect control, and so on and so forth, and all of life on Earth, including us. By the way, you might try to picture the Earth without any one of those elements of the biosphere. So we have the technosphere, we have the biosphere, and we have the coexistence of the two within a thin spherical shell that is 8,000 miles in diameter, the diameter of the Earth, and only about 10 miles thick, extending from sea level about 5 miles into the depths of the ocean, about 5 miles into the troposphere. Notice that we humans are the common element in both systems, both spheres, and relatively speaking, the thin shell is the thickness of saran wrap on a basketball-sized Earth. In this context, then, a good, maybe better definition of sustainability might be, if I can be so bold, the continued, healthy, balanced coexistence into the indefinite future of the technosphere and the biosphere within the thin shell. Another name for the biosphere, of course, is nature. Yet it's manifestly clear to anyone that cares to look that this coexistence is so unbalanced, so threatened that it is not healthy. Rachel Carson's Wrong Road. On a global scale, every living system is in decline. Biodiversity plummets. An extinction unprecedented in 65 million years is underway now. The human footprint increases. The planet's carrying capacity for humans shrinks. The planet warms. The climate is disrupted. The weather goes nuts. The technosphere continues to expand at nature's expense as the economy worships at their sacred shrine of growth. The question arises, how can this go on and on and on and on into the indefinite future? And the answer is clearly it cannot, unless we somehow miraculously find that the Earth is infinite in its ability to supply the stuff demanded by the technosphere and infinite in its ability to absorb the poison produced by the technosphere. This imbalance, this disequilibrium, is a serious problem. We're creating not only for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren, and beyond. So how do we begin to reverse the negative trends, eliminate this problem, and bring these two systems, technosphere and nature, into harmonious balance in a way that will last 1,000 human generations, 10,000 human generations, that is to say, indefinitely. We should be very clear, the longer we wait to get started in earnest, the greater will be the deficit that we and successive generations have to overcome. So I'm addressing the time horizon that extends from now through a period of urgent, enormous, and essential transformation to a state of global equilibrium between biosphere and technosphere in which the two will coexist in balance and harmony, meaning the technosphere will be taken from the biosphere no more than the biosphere can naturally and rapidly renew with energy input from the sun into the indefinite future. That, to me, is sustainability. So how does the technosphere, we in this industrial system of ours, move from its present state to that ideal end state of equilibrium and remain there into the distant future? Well, let's begin to answer that question by assessing where the industrial system is now. For starters, our society, especially its industrial system, and essentially every corporation anywhere, is in the iron grip of Paul and Ann Ehrlich's environmental impact equation, I equal P times A times T, from the population bomb, which they published in 1997, in which I stands for environmental impact, a negative term, the bigger, the worse. P stands for population, A for affluence, and T for technology in its broadest sense, as I just described. This equation says that environmental impact or degradation is caused by people, the more the worse, what they consume in their affluence, the more the worse, and how all of that is produced, used, and disposed of. The more technology, the worse. So at the heart of the current and ongoing environmental decline is this take, make, waste industrial system. Making and supplying the stuff that we humans consume in our affluence and discard in our thoughtlessness. And technology, T, is a major part of the problem. So are affluence and population. Population is a subject for another day, and I make no effort here to deal with it, nor in the book. But I will get to affluence in a little while. But first, we must ask, what confines T to the numerator, where it contributes to the problem instead of to the solution? Why does T multiply negative impacts? I suggest that this is because T in the numerator accurately represents the technologies of the first industrial revolution, call them T1. We've grown up with these, and we take them for granted. Consequently, they're prevalent in our society and its industrial system, and they share some common attributes. They are extractive. They take from the earth. They are linear, take, make, waste, driven by energy from fossil fuels, wasteful, abusive, and focused on labor productivity, more of everything per man hour. So the Ehrlich equation could properly be modified to read I equal P times A times T1. In high-tech terms, 1.0. That describes our industrial system. And I further suggest that the prevalence of T1 arises out of a flawed view of reality that underlies the industrial system, a paradigm that traces its roots to the earliest days of the Industrial Revolution, the early 18th century, when people were the limiting factor of production and nature was bountiful, seemingly inexhaustible. It is a view of reality that assumes, or acts as if it assumes, that the earth is infinite in its ability to provide the stuff to feed the industrial system's metabolism, and infinite in its ability to absorb the system's waste, no matter how much, no matter how poisonous. Relevant time frames for considering the consequences of our individual decisions are very short, almost never beyond our own lifetimes, more likely not beyond our working lives. In business, long-range planning is maybe 5 years. In politics, the next election. Earth was made for humans to conquer and rule. Homo sapiens don't really need those other species, except for food and fiber, fuel, and maybe shade on a hot summer day. Adam Smith's invisible hand of the market is an honest broker. Business exists to make a profit, the Milton Friedman school of thought. The route to abundance for all is through increasing labor productivity, more everything per man hour. It was natural enough to think this way in the 18th century when people were scarce and nature was bountiful. Why not use nature to enhance human productivity? It made perfect sense then, 300 years ago. Technology coupled with left-brain human intelligence, practical, pragmatic, numbers-driven, results-oriented will see us through. Though the iPad equation stands in defiant contravention of this assumption. There's more, but I expect you get the drift. I suggest that the view of reality represented by these beliefs is deeply flawed, and it also underlies a flawed system of economics that begins by describing the basic economic problem that drives all economic progress as the gap between what we have and what we want. Not need, want. This is the first lesson in Economics 101. And economists tell us we can never close that gap because whatever we have, we will always want more, and that gap drives all economic progress. It's also a system that worships at the shrine of growth, without due consideration for what should grow and what should not grow. And it is a system that ignores the externalities, the cost to society, and innocent third parties that are inherent in so many of the transactions that it fosters, as it establishes prices solely on the basis of supply and demand without regard to true costs. This, of course, renders the invisible hand blind as a bat in its allocation of resources as it stumbles along in its blindness, ignoring the consequences of its actions that are represented by the externalities it creates. When we stand back and look at this system and the mindset or the worldview that underlies it, we cannot avoid the inevitable conclusion. This system that takes from the earth whatever it wants to produce products that quickly end up in landfills and incinerators, think pollution, wastes vast amounts of resources all along the way, and does all of this with total indifference to societal costs, simply cannot go on and on and on. Its days of necessity are numbered, because the industrial system that stems from this worldview is destroying the biosphere that undergirds the system itself. Or you tell me, what company, what economy can survive without air, clean water, food, energy, materials, climate regulation, an ultraviolet radiation shield, pollination, seed dispersal, flood and insect control, water purification and distribution, the hydrologic cycle, nutrient cycling, photosynthesis, and more, all provided by nature. Without any one of these, there would be very little economy at all. Nature truly is the goose that lays all the golden eggs, and like the goose in Jack and the Beanstalk, nature is being squeezed to death. If this is the state in which we, the technosphere, the industrial system, and ourselves found ourselves, where must we go from here? And how? For starters, we must find a way to rewrite the early impact equation, to break its iron grip, and move technology to the denominator. Then technology would reduce environmental impacts and become part of the solution instead of a major contributor to the problem. The mathematically minded will see it immediately. The bigger T becomes in the denominator, the smaller the environmental impacts become. But what must happen societally for such a transformation to occur? I suggest that the underlying mindset, the paradigm, the view of reality must change. The old flawed view born of the 18th century must be replaced by a new mindset that acknowledges that the earth is finite as a source and a sink. We can see it from space, that is it. The relevant time frames for considering the consequences of our decisions are evolutionary in scale. We must grow up as a species and learn to think beyond our individual lifetimes and our trivial self-interests. Humankind was made for Earth, not the other way around. The Earth doesn't belong to us, we belong to it. And the diversity and vitality of nature are crucially important in keeping the whole web of life, including us, going sustainably over evolutionary time. The blind, invisible hand of the market is a dishonest, opportunistic broker. It will force any cost on society that an unwary or uncaring public will allow it to. It must constantly be redressed to keep it honest and give it sight. Business exists to make a profit? I beg to differ. Business makes a profit to exist, not the other way around, and must surely exist for some higher purpose, given its pervasive global reach and its power for good or evil. What CEO really expects to stand before her or his maker someday and discuss shareholder value? And what about technologies? Technologies that are extractive, linear, make waste, driven by fossil fuels, wasteful, abusive, focused on labor productivity, emanating from a flawed mindset, are inherently unsustainable. They do belong in the numerator where they multiply environmental degradation. To move to the denominator and become part of the solution, technologies must evolve to become renewable, cyclical, driven by solar energy, waste-free, benign, and focused on resource productivity, the efficient use of all resources, not just labor. I equal P times A divided by T2. This is the new test for the viability and suitability of technologies in the sustainable industrial system and in the corporation of the future. Do you see how T2 technologies emulate nature? How interesting. Biomimicry at work on a very large stage. Cyclical, renewable, waste-free, focused on resource productivity. That's the way nature works. These T2 technologies can also put people, no longer scarce, but today an overly abundant resource, to work in ways that conserve nature, which is now the scarce and diminishing resource here in the 21st century. For sure, the greatest moral, ethical, and practical challenge humankind faces is lifting the poorest among us out of grinding poverty, the 4 billion poorest among us out of grinding poverty, while simultaneously repairing an already badly damaged biosphere. Resource efficiency, the efficient use of all resources, is the route to abundance for all, for an indefinite future on a finite earth. As for intelligence, what about right brain intelligence? The subjective, the caring, the nurturing, the artistic side of intelligence. Perhaps it's a good bit more important than the left side, since it also represents the human spirit. And therefore the ascendancy of women in business, in the professions and government is one of the most encouraging of all trends as women bring that right-brain nurturing nature to bear on the seemingly intractable problems created by us left-wing men. So if society adopts this new mindset, how does it then shape the corporation of the future? Indeed, the industrial system of the future that will survive and thrive as an integral component of the technosphere that is in harmony and balance with the biosphere into the indefinite future. Well, that sounds downright utopian, doesn't it? Is it even possible? Well, the answer to the question, is it possible, is found at the micro level. And the answer is yes, it is possible. As Amy Levins, founder and chief scientist of the Rocky Mountain Institute, often says, if something exists, it must be possible. I can quote Amy because I speak here drawing from the real-life experiences of my company, Interface, an example of what is coming into existence, what is proving to be possible, and as for how, in answer to the first question, the Interface experience is the result of a plan for achieving zero environmental footprint by the year 2020. This is the plan that is transforming a typical petro-intensive company for energy and materials of the 20th century into a prototypical sustainable company of the 21st century. How we get there is the main focus of Confessions. I suggest out of strong conviction that if Interface, given its petroleum-intensive nature, can do it, any company can. If any company can, it follows that every company can. That is to say, the entire industrial system can. Well, how did such a conviction originate? In 1994, as Anthony said, inspired by Paul Hawkins' treatise, The Economy of Commerce, I committed Interface to the path to sustainability and to the plan for achieving it. 15 years ago, despite the enormous challenge inherent in such an ambitious commitment, we began at Interface where every company must begin, where we were. As part of a supply chain that took materials and energy, both fossil derived from the earth, produced our products in linear take-make-waste processes, sold those products into a marketplace where they served their purpose typically for 10 to 20 years, and thence were relegated to landfills and incinerators, long since forgotten by us, their maker. We first created a schematic showing all of the linkages of our company to the earth. Its biosphere and its lithosphere through our suppliers, our customers, the communities in which we operate, and directly through our own people, our own processes, and products. I will not bore you with the details of the schematic, but we asked ourselves 15 years ago, what is wrong with this picture? We asked this question when very few, if any companies anywhere, were asking such a question of themselves. And out of that question came the plan for realizing a new vision to climb a very high mountain, clear to the top, that point at the summit symbolizing zero impact. We call this mountain Mount Sustainability. The challenge is hugely daunting. The commitment to reach the summit must be equally unrelenting and unfaltering. The goal to operate our petro-intensive company so as to take from the earth only what the earth can naturally and rapidly renew and to do no harm to the biosphere. To get off oil completely, to get off coal completely. And as we studied this mountain for fully a year, we identified 7 faces of Mount Sustainability, and we set out to climb each face to its own peak to meet at the summit, which symbolizes zero footprint, zero impact by 2020. We call this Mission Zero. The first face of the mountain is to eliminate waste, even the very concept of waste, emulating nature in our industrial processes. In nature, there's no waste. One organism's waste is another organism's food. The cost avoided by this effort through 2008, some $405 million today, have funded the entire mountain climbing, rendering sustainability self-funding. The second phase of the mountain is to ensure totally benign emissions. working upstream with suppliers to establish the screens that eliminate all the harmful materials. For whatever comes into our factories will go out as product, solid waste, or liquid effluent, or gaseous emissions. We want to operate without smokestacks and without effluent pipes, and for sure without toxics or greenhouse gases that contribute to climate disruption. The third phase of the mountain is to operate on 100% renewable energy, concentrating on energy efficiency first to drive energy usage to that irreducible minimum, and then harnessing renewable sources of energy or creating verifiable offsets to eliminate or neutralize all greenhouse gas contribution to global climate disruption. The fourth phase of the mountain is to close the loop on material flows, to capture precious, energy-intensive hydrocarbon molecules after their first product life and give them life after life in cyclical flows. No more linear take-back-waste processes, but the cyclical processes too, driven by renewable energy. The technologies did not exist when we began 15 years ago, but now they fall into place one by one. This is not a flavor of the month exercise, it is a commitment of a lifetime. The fifth phase of the mountain is the transportation phase, to transport people and products in pollution-free, resource-efficient, climate-neutral modes. The sixth phase is perhaps the most important of all, sensitizing stakeholders. This is the culture shift. This is changing the mindset that underlies our production system, and not just the mindset of our own people, but of suppliers and customers and communities. Without such a shift in mindset, no lasting changes will occur. As Albert Einstein told us, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. Overcoming vitally necessary new thinking comes only out of a new mindset. Overcoming the status quo, we've always done it this way, is hard, but it is essential. And it does not happen without a willingness to risk failure, but to learn from failure and try again. The seventh phase of the mountain calls for the redesign of commerce itself, for the new economy, an economy that seeks to satisfy needs rather than wants, internalizes the externality of the prices, gets the prices right, and creates an honest, sighted market. For many industrial companies like Interface, this will eventually translate into going to market with the services that our products provide, rather than with the products themselves. Treating products as a means to an end, the end being satisfactory service delivered. For Interface, this translates into selling color and texture, and design and comfort underfoot, and acoustical control and cleanliness and ambiance and functionality, satisfying all the reasons for which anyone would want our carpets in the first place, while retaining ownership of the means of delivery. Parenthetically, a chapter of Confessions is devoted to each of the seven faces of the mountain, discussing how you actually do what I have just described in cursory terms. Success on all seven faces of the mountain would result in an entirely new schematic. Again, I'll spare you the tedium of the schematics, but you can see there are no linkages to the lithosphere for raw materials and no linkages to the biosphere for waste and emissions. How is our real-life example doing? How far has it come in 15 years on this 26-year-long journey? Well, the following 2008 ecometrics tell the story. Cumulative avoided waste costs, $405 million, 78% reduction in landfill waste per unit of production, water intake down 74%, total energy usage down 44% per unit of production, fossil fuel intensity reduced by 60%, net greenhouse gases reduced 71% in absolute tonnage. That translates into 82% reduction in greenhouse gas intensity relative to sales. 28% of global energy from renewable sources. 24% of total raw materials are recycled or bio-based materials. 100% renewable electricity in our European factories, 89% worldwide. 83 million square yards of climate-neutral carpet produced since 2003. meaning climate neutral from the wellhead and the mine clear to end-of-life reclamation, the full life cycle. Net zero on greenhouse gas emissions. 87,500 tons of reclaimed product brought back through our re-entry effort to close the loop on material flows. 191 million airline passenger miles offset by the planting of some 98,000 trees, though admittedly there's a time lag while the trees grow. Overall footprint reduction about 60%, depending on how you weigh the individual components of it. And in case you're wondering, can a company do all this and not go broke? See the last two metrics. Sales up by 60% over the same time frame, spanning the deepest, longest recession in our industry's history from 2001 through 2003. And profits double. The business case is crystal clear. Costs are down, not up. Dispelling the myth and the false choice between the economy and the environment. The waste elimination effort alone, $405 million, has paved the way here. Products are better than ever. Sustainable design is a wellspring of innovation, especially biomimicry. And I'll give you an example of that later. People are galvanized around the shared higher purpose. You cannot beat it from attracting the best people and bringing them together around a shared purpose. Goodwill in the marketplace, greater than any amount of advertising or clever marketing at any cost could have created. And believe me, we know that goodwill is earned every day by doing, not by talking. It is a better way to bigger, more legitimate profits, a better business model, better for the planet and better for the shareholder. But coming back to the macro case, what about this sacred shrine of growth? Moving toward a sustainable society, what should grow and what should not grow? Well, here are some thoughts. The lowest impact technologies, those that belong in the denominator, should grow. The abusive technologies, those that belong in the numerator, should shrink and eventually disappear. The sale of services should grow. The sale of products should shrink. Applied brain power should grow. Applied brute force should shrink. Market shares for the sustainable companies should grow. For the unsustainable companies, market shares should shrink to zero. At best, however, humanity faces a period of transition in which the equation will read I equal P times A times T1 divided by T2, where T1 represents the unsustainable technologies, T2 the sustainable technologies, and over time, T1 must give way to T2 until eventually only T2 is left. But can humanity realize a sustainable society even if the entire industrial system eventually operates within the revised Ehrlich equations, I equal P times A divided by T2? I think not. For affluence is still represented by a capital A in that equation, suggesting that affluence is an end in itself, perhaps the end. And this just seems entirely too consistent with the old definition of the basic economic problem, the gap between what we have and what we want. What if, however, we Homo sapiens matured as a species to the point that the basic economic problem were redefined as the gap between what we have and what we need? What if that resulted from a reordering of priorities for individuals and society so that affluence could be represented by a lowercase a instead of a capital A, suggesting it to be a means to an end rather than an end or the end in itself? And what if the true end we all seek, happiness, were injected into a further revised Ehrlich equation? It would then read I equals P times lowercase a divided by T2 times capital H. More happiness with less stuff. That would redefine not only the industrial system, but civilization itself, as well as capitalism, and would open up the real possibility for all human needs being met through fair and efficient use of all resources, meeting the challenge to lift the 4 billion poorest among us out of grinding poverty while healing the already badly damaged biosphere. But can the corporation of the future that I have described survive and thrive among such a reoriented set of societal priorities? I suggest that only the corporation of the future, as I have described, organized to meet needs sustainably, can survive in such a reordered world into an indefinite future. The typical corporation of the present will be the proverbial fish out of water, and will surely suffer the same fate as that unfortunate fish. Environmental impacts must become vanishingly small if humans, even 7 generations from now, much less 10,000 generations from now, are to be born into a livable world. Yet one might ask, isn't there a chicken and an egg problem here? Will a transformed society drive the transformation of the industrial system, or will a transformed industrial system drive the transformation of society? And the answer is yes and yes. For the critical breakthrough mutation has already occurred. The chicken, the new species of company, is being born right now. So the two, society and its new industrial system, can co-evolve to the higher plane where equilibrium between technosphere and biosphere is achieved at last. And that, I believe, will create the foundation for a new world order, as well as a sustainable, livable future for all generations to come. The last major variable, population, P, remains. But actually it may not be as independent a variable as seems in the equation. The forces that give rise to modified affluence and greater happiness, in particular the education of women around the world, may very well influence population to a lower level than the current UN projection of some 9 billion people indicates. But as I said in the beginning, that's a discussion for another day. So let's go back again to the micro level. Perhaps you're asking, what does this look like on your factory floor, Anderson? What's it look like in your design studio? Show me sustainability in action. What changes? Okay, come with me and see what sustainability looks like in just 2 examples in the time that's left. A team of engineers, production personnel, and product designers collaborate to find another way to create patterned carpet. The conventional way employed for years by the factory and its chief competitors is to wet print patterns on a plain-colored carpet base. Wet printing is water-intensive and energy-intensive, requiring an aqueous dye application, high-energy steaming to fix the dye to the fiber, washing to remove the excess unfixed dye, and energy-intensive drying to remove the wash water. Excess dye and wash water also require chemical treatment before release into the waterways. But new thinking, what Einstein was talking about, suggests that the tufting machine that forms the power face of the carpet in the first place has untapped potential to precisely place tufts of yarn of selected colors to form quite intricate and more durable patterns. So the bold decision is made to burn the bridges and abandon wet printing altogether, to scrap the existing stranded investment. That was only one means of creating patterns which the marketplace demands. Development efforts result in entirely new families of patented inventions, giving them the factory proprietary edge rather than a handicap in its marketplace. Drastic reduction in resource consumption, both water and energy. One of those patented inventions arises from the outrageous, ridiculous assignment by the head of design to his design team to go into the forest and see how nature would design a floor covering. And don't come back with leaf designs, he says. Come back with nature's design principles. The head of design has read Biomimicry by Janine Bendis. Biomimicry, nature is teacher, nature is inspiration, nature is mentor, nature as measure. So the design team spends a day studying the forest floor, the stream beds, And they finally come to realize this total diversity, even chaos, no two things are alike. No two sticks, no two leaves, no two stones, no two square yards of the forest floor are the same. Yet there's a pleasant orderliness in this chaos. So the designers go back to the design studio, they design the carpet tile, such that the face designs of no two tiles are identical. All are similar, but every one is different from all the others. Now, how contrary is this to the prevailing industrial paradigm that every mass-produced item must be the cookie-cutter same, Six Sigma uniformity? The new product is introduced to the market with the name entropy, scientific term suggesting disorder. And in a year and a half, it moves to the top of the bestseller list, faster than any other product ever has, and quickly becomes the largest selling carpet tile in the history of the industry. The advantages of breaking the old paradigm, this insistence on perfection and sameness, are surprisingly numerous. There's almost no waste, no off quality in production. Inspectors cannot find defects among the deliberate imperfections of no two tiles alike. The installer can install tiles very quickly without having to take the traditional care to get the power map all running uniformly. The less uniform, the better. So he can just take tiles out of the box the way they come and install them randomly. There's almost no scrap during installation. Even a piece tile can find a place in the installation. And then the user can actually rotate can replace an individual damaged tile on the floor without creating that sore thumb effect that so typically comes when everything is uniform and the new is placed among the old, the sore thumb. Furthermore, there are no longer issues of dye lots. Dye lots merge indistinguishably, which obviates the need for shelf stock, those extra tiles of the original dye lot on the shelf waiting to be used. And now the user can even rotate the carpet tiles on the floor to equalize the way we rotate tires on our automobiles and make selective replacement of damaged areas. All of this is good for the environment through increased resource efficiency. Nature, the inspiration, is anything but cookie-cutter uniform. She knows nothing about Six Sigma, yet she's very effective and a great teacher. And still, even with all the unexpected benefits of entropy, one wonders, is there still more to explain its success? Or perhaps there is. A speaker on the environmental speaking circuit begins every speech by having her audience close their eyes and in their mind's eye picture their own ideal place, their own comfort zone, that ideal place of peace and repose and tranquility and serenity, creativity, that perfect comfort zone. We might try it here. Humor me. Everybody, close your eyes and in your mind's eye picture your ideal place of peace and repose and tranquility and serenity, comfort, creativity. Your perfect comfort zone. Have you got it? Now lift your hand high if you're somewhere outdoors. Look around. Look around, everybody. We humans gravitate to nature for that ideal comfort zone. It's uncanny. I've done this 500 times around the world, and no population does it vary. It's 90% plus of the audience raise their hands. We humans gravitate to nature, and somehow I think entry takes outdoors, indoors in a subliminal way, and that is its real appeal. Sustainability in action. I think Einstein would be pleased. I'm out of time, and I thank you very much for being here. You've been a terrific audience. And if it's time for questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks for letting me go outside in my mind there. I really like what you're saying here. I wonder about getting there from here, of course, and something that I'm really concerned about is the kind of the short-term financial decision-making that can often stymie such transformation. I think you've made some very good points that that there's sort of this false, in many cases, assumption that sustainability equals less profit, and that there are times where you can make more profit by being more sustainable. However, it seems like a tough sell to a lot of people who manage money. Is this compatible with our sort of notions of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, et cetera?
The short answer is absolutely yes. And what we're learning at Interface is that indeed it is a better way. And key to this better way, of course, is the support of the marketplace. We operate in a marketplace that's heavily influenced by interior designers and architects. They're people who really want to do the right thing. So in a sense, we're in a microcosm of a much larger market, but it's dominated by people who really do want to do the right thing or heavily influenced. So the name of the game is to spread, that awareness that exists in the architecture interior design community to a much larger the population in general. So ultimately, the power is with the people. When Jeffrey Immelt, the CEO of General Electric, commits to doubling his R&D from $750 million a year to $1.5 billion in clean technologies, expecting to double its revenue from $10 billion to $20 billion in the sale of those clean technologies, there's not an ounce of altruism in that. He's heard his customers say, we need these technologies. And when the public wakes up to what a hell of a mess the earth is in and begins to demand it of every product, then, the marketplace is supporting the movement. Deepak Chopra has a way of saying people are doing the best they can, given their level of awareness. This is all about raising level of awareness and spreading that raised level of awareness throughout the population. We're in a race against time. We really are. I'll put it this way. The first industrial revolution still goes on. Okay, the extractive abuse of media, technology, waste. That's Thomas Newcomen's revolution. He started it in 1712 when he invented the steam-driven pump to pump water out of the English coal mines, so the miners could mine more coal. The second industrial revolution that I referred to here in the comments is Rachel Carson's revolution. She started it in 1962. Now here we are, 47 years into Rachel Carson's revolution. When we were 47 years into Thomas Newcomen's revolution, the cotton gin had not yet been invented. So it's really early days as revolutions go. But the problem is we don't have the time. We don't have the luxury of time for this revolution to unfold. It's incumbent on all of us to push the bar as high as we can, as quickly as we can. Yes?
Thanks for your talk. Could you tell me what you would do as a CEO in the auto industry? Maybe name a few of the things that you'd go after, examples of changes you'd put those teams to work on.
Well, it clearly would have taken different thinking, a new kind of thinking 10, 15 years ago in that industry. And I wouldn't presume to know anything about the automobile industry, except that you can look around and you see examples of who stole the march on whom. And Toyota most certainly did by going after the hybrid technology and dominating that field today. So the things that could be done ought to have been done 15 years ago, and now they've got a down deep hole to dig out of. It's just that simple. And I suspect that only those who are really thinking about their business very differently will survive. But I don't know what that different thinking actually means.
You commented about awareness as being a function.
I'm sorry.
You commented about awareness being a function of making the change. And, in the larger economic system, almost every economic decision ultimately comes down to money. And if you don't have the awareness, then sometimes price is a good substitute in order to encourage people to make that awareness. How do you make this change relatively obvious so it scales faster?
Yeah, I really think government has a role to play. And in my mind, government's greatest power is not its regulatory power. which is vast, and it's brought us to where we are, which is good. But its greatest power is its taxation and subsidy power. And we very much need for government to get involved, to put a price on carbon, especially with respect to global climate disruption. Carbon has a free ride forever. And we all know there's no such thing as a free lunch. So we paid for carbon, but in indirect ways, like rising sea levels and the dikes that will have to be built to protect Miami and New York City in the future, and the price of wars in the Middle East to protect the oil at its source, and so on and so forth. The externalities are there. We're paying for them. We need to be paying for those directly in the price of carbon. And then that would put our minds where the problem really is, and it would level the playing field between the new technologies and the old. And you would see the new technologies surge if there were a level playing field. And fossil fuels were priced properly.
So this is the end of Ray's talk, but if you'd like to join us for lunch, we're going to go to Charlie's Cafe. So with that, thank Ray for joining us today.